Hearing the first reading reminds me of a little story from my life, which I think is worth speaking of just in terms of something it can kind of bring up for us in these readings. I remember my first year in seminary in theology, so I guess my fourth year in seminary, but my first year in theology. So I went to a new seminary, which is normal for that transition between the first half of seminary and the second. And we were there in our first year. And of course, one of the things we do in seminary every year is we begin the year with a retreat. I don't actually know if it's part of the program for priestly formation. It probably is, but it's an important part of spiritual formation for sure. So we had an 8-day retreat at the beginning of the school year, probably 2 or 3 weeks in since we've started to kind of get to know each other as a class of seminary. So our class went out, the first year guys at the North American College there, and we went on our retreat. And as we went out onto the retreat, it was a silent retreat for 8 days. And we were entering into prayer and having a good time with it all. I mean, not that we were partying or anything, but just that the Lord was doing good work, right? And I remember the second day, I think it was, of retreat, where we were all going about our business, our day. I was just walking around the campus of the retreat place and praying. And I heard the voice of some of my fellow seminarians. Clearly, they were not observing silence for the retreat, right? And it also sounded like they were clearly not talking about holy things either. Not that it was immoral things that they were talking about, but they just weren't entering into the spirit of the retreat. And so I found myself there. I was literally up on the top of a staircase, and they were at the bottom of the staircase. So I was kind of out of view, but could hear them. And it made me think to myself, gosh, I feel like I should do something about this. I feel like I should say something to them to invite them back into the spirit of the retreat. Maybe this is the reason why God had me walk along this path at this time. And I was really perturbed by that thought. Gosh, should I say something about it? Or should I just, I barely know these guys. What are they going to think of me if I tell them something? Are they going to, is that going to harm our relationship for the next 4 years that we're going to spend together? And I sat in that place trembling in fear, basically. There was no courage in my disposition here. But it was a similar experience to what Jeremiah said in the first reading. All day long I'm an object of laughter. Everyone mocks me. Whenever I speak, I must cry out. But then it becomes like a burning fire within my heart, imprisoned with my bones. I grow weary holding it in. I cannot endure it. And so God won the day for me, in a sense. And again, I went over to the group of guys and didn't have any fancy words to tell them or anything. I probably was trembling in front of them. I probably was stammering in front of them. But I said, hey, guys, the Lord wants more for you in this retreat. He wants to talk to you. He wants to invite you into a moment of prayer. It was super awkward, right? They thought I was coming them to kind of join in the conversation with them, but kind of stood there awkwardly for a second, and then I just left. I didn't know what to do. And then the reason that this is worth anything to speak about is that at the end of the retreat, we always have a sharing of graces. So everybody in the retreat goes around and says one thing it was that really was a moment of grace for them. And one of the guys in this group, and again, I have great respect for these guys. They're good and holy priests, but maybe we're just in a moment of weakness. But one of them, as we were going around and saying his graces, said, there was a time in this retreat where a brother reached out to me and invited me to turn back to prayer. And so I did. I stopped distracting myself from other things. And so the rest of the retreat was really powerful for me. And I'm very grateful to that brother for doing that. It's super humbling for me, right? And thankfully he didn't call me out by name. That would have been super embarrassing. But it speaks to me a little bit of what we're hearing in these readings for today, right? That sometimes we do have to say something that's difficult to say or do something that's difficult to do, but it's the will of God. And even if we can only do it trembling in fear and doing it just because it feels like, we can't hold God in anymore, it can be a fruitful thing. Yeah, it may be awkward. It may be like it might not turn out so hot, but God's going to use that, right? And this is where we hear in the gospel today too, Jesus talking about himself, like having to go and suffer, and then telling the disciples, you're going to have to deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. And he calls us into that, to follow him in those difficult moments. It might cause us a little bit of suffering in the moment, but God's going to bring such great fruit through it. So let's do as Jesus tells us to do, to take up our cross and follow him. And I think when those difficult moments come, one thing that's more important to remember than anything else, even as you might have to do something and it feels awkward or it feels like you're afraid of it, do it with love. Do it with love, and the rest will take care of itself, And when we do that, when we take up our cross and so follow the Lord in those ways, even in those moments that are very difficult, God will bring great fruit. Maybe you won't get a chance to see it like I did at the end of the week. That's one good thing about seminarians is we tend to be very open to those sorts of things. Maybe you'll have to say something difficult, and it might not be until years later when somebody comes back to you and says, I remember that moment, and you taking a stand and you saying something to me made all the difference, and I'm so grateful to you for that. Maybe it won't be even years, maybe it'll be in eternal life. But when we do follow the Lord, take up our cross and follow him, he's going to bring great fruit through those efforts we make.